Next, the former Conservative Prime Minister Sir John Major has been giving evidence at a public inquiry into what's been described as the biggest medical disaster in the history of the NHS. Nearly 5,000 people with haemophilia and other blood disorders were given a treatment infected with HIV or hepatitis in the 70s and 80s. Sir John, who's been questioned about the level of financial support and compensation offered, described what happened to those affected as incredibly bad luck. Our health correspondent, Jim Reid, reports.
I suppose the biggest impact is I'm not the person I was meant to have been. You can't erase the darkness. You can't erase the fear. It's always lurking.
Mark was just a child when he was warned about a medication he'd been given. His parents were told his new treatment for a blood disorder had been contaminated with HIV.
I can't really describe the feeling, because it was like, well, first of all you question, well, why are you going to school to take exams for a future and a life you're not going to have? When your doctor says, if you're lucky, but I don't think you'll live long enough to leave school, why bother? Why?
Mark's life was saved by new HIV drugs. Others died before they could be made available. In total, 5,000 people with haemophilia were left with HIV, hepatitis or both. Many more were exposed after a blood transfusion in the 70s and 80s.
Right, thank you.
This morning, the former Prime Minister, Sir John Major, has started giving evidence at the long-running public inquiry into the disaster.
I swear by Almighty God.
He was working in the Treasury in the late 1980s and described a growing sense that public money would be needed to support the families affected.
It was becoming apparent how serious the issue was and how widespread the issue was and how unsustainable it would be for the people who were suffering without some form of practical compensation.
But his description of the disaster as bad luck drew gasps from the families watching, who've always believed more should have been done to understand the risks.
I mean, there's no amount of compensation you can give that could actually compensate for what had happened to them. What had happened to them was incredibly bad luck, awful, and it was not something that anybody was unsympathetic to.
I was falling asleep, I was being sick.
Melanie was another of the thousands infected when she was just 17. She was diagnosed with hepatitis C, a disease which can slowly destroy the liver, and has suffered from health problems ever since.
As soon as I found out what hepatitis C was and realised that it was impacting on my life and that I was possibly not going to see my children grow up, it has been like living without being alive. It's had a huge impact on every single victim. That feeling of it could have been avoided.
Melanie is now on a different modern treatment to control her blood disorder. Like thousands of others, though, she is still living with the consequences of what happened 3 decades ago and still looking for answers so many years later. Jim Reid, BBC News.